When my grandma passed away last spring, I didn't cry at the funeral. I stood there in a black suit that didn't quite fit my frame, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't process it yet. I was 22, just a few months out of college, and she was the only person who had ever made me feel truly seen. Everyone else in our family kind of just tolerated me. But Grandma Evelyn, she actually listened. She'd call every week, no matter what. She'd send letters, real ones, with her careful cursive handwriting, and she'd always sign them. "Don't forget you're already enough, Logan." So when I tell you what happened after the funeral, I need you to understand, this wasn't just about money. This was about the one person who never treated me like I was an inconvenience being taken from me, and then having everything she left behind threatened by people who didn't deserve a dime. The ranch was something of a legend in our family. 200 acres of open land, rolling hills, barns that smelled like hay and would smoke, and a little house with creaky floors and warm light. Grandma had lived there her entire life. So had her father. She was the last of that line, or so everyone thought. My mom used to tell me that one day my uncle would run it when she passed, that it was the natural order. But I think my grandma saw how fake they all were. How everyone, my Uncle Rick especially, only started visiting once her health took a turn. Rick was the type of guy who'd show up with flowers, a wide grin, and a fake, "How are you holding up?" before launching into some story about how hard life was with his construction business. He hadn't lifted a hammer in years. He paid other people to do that, but he still wore the high-vis vest like it was a badge of honor. His wife, Lorraine, was worse. She'd wander around Grandma's place commenting on how quaint everything was, then drop hints like, "Oh, this porch could be so charming with a few modern touches." And don't get me started on their kids. My cousins Tyler and Brandon, both in their mid-20s, one working as a crypto advisor, and the other trying to launch his 6th YouTube channel. The kind of people who think hard work is beneath them, but still expect to be rewarded just for showing up. I stayed quiet mostly. I always have. Growing up, my mom died when I was 10. After that, I bounced around between relatives, mostly Rick and Lorraine, who treated me like an obligation. I was the quiet boy, the one who never asked for anything, the one they'd forget to include in family vacations and later say, "Oh, you wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway." I learned early to keep to myself. When I turned 18, I got out. Scholarship to a small university 2 states over, lived off campus, worked part-time, and only came back to the ranch to visit Grandma. She was the only one who made those visits feel like coming home. When she died, the whole family flew in like vultures. The funeral was held in the small town chapel she loved. It was a simple service. Open casket, hymns, some quiet tears. My uncle gave a eulogy that sounded more like a business pitch. Evelyn taught us all the value of investing in land and community, while I stood in the back pew, hands clenched in my pockets, wondering how no one else saw through him. After the service, we gathered at the ranch. The air felt too still, like even the land was holding its breath. I stayed behind when everyone else moved inside, walking through the orchard Grandma, and I used to pick apples from every fall. I could still hear her humming to herself, still feel the way she used to place her hand on my shoulder when I doubted myself. She always said I had a quiet strength that no one else in the family appreciated. The reading of the will was scheduled for the next morning. Rick had taken it upon himself to coordinate everything, calling the lawyer, setting the time, ensuring a smooth transition. His words, not mine. I got a text that night from him, 9 a.m. sharp. "Don't be late. Lawyers flying in." "No, thanks for being here." "No, how are you holding up?" "Just a cold directive." I showed up early anyway. Sat at the old wooden table in the dining room, the same place I'd eaten peach cobbler with Grandma just 6 months ago. The whole family trickled in after me, dressed far too formally for a will reading. Lorraine had on a sleek black blazer and pearls, like she was heading to a board meeting. Tyler and Brandon were both glued to their phones. My stomach twisted with nerves, but I kept my mouth shut. The lawyer arrived a few minutes past 9. Mr. Delaney, older man with a deep voice and a leather briefcase he handled like it was sacred. He shook everyone's hand, then opened the case and pulled out 2 thick envelopes. One was cream-colored and slightly worn, the other bright white and sealed with red wax. "Before we begin," he said, glancing at the group, "I need to inform you that this will reading includes a secondary provision. Mrs. Evelyn Winters left specific instructions about the order in which these documents are to be opened. Rick gave a smug little laugh. I'm sure it's all pretty straightforward. She was always good about keeping things tidy. Delaney didn't smile. We'll begin with the primary will. He opened the cream envelope and began reading. Standard stuff at first. Jewelry to Lorraine. A small trust to Brandon and Tyler, contingent on them finishing some kind of financial course. The rest of us exchanged polite nods. Then Delaney paused. And the full ownership of the Winters Ranch, including its assets, livestock, equipment, and the adjacent orchard, appraised at $2.8 million, is hereby granted to Logan Winters, my grandson, in full, with no lien, no conditions. The room went silent. My ears rang. Rick let out an actual laugh, short, sharp, disbelieving. Wait, what? Lorraine blinked like she'd misheard. Tyler looked up from his phone. Brandon said, that's gotta be a typo. But Delaney was already continuing, listing coordinates, parcel numbers, transfer clauses. I sat frozen, heart hammering in my chest, not quite sure I was hearing correctly. Rick stood. That doesn't make any sense. He's just a kid. He doesn't know how to run a ranch. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Delaney set the first will aside and picked up the white envelope with the wax seal. Mrs. Winters anticipated this reaction. That's why she left a secondary letter, sealed and to be read only after the first. He cracked the seal. The wax split cleanly. As he read, his brow furrowed. His eyes flicked up to meet mine, then to Rick, then back to the paper. Then his face went pale. He folded the letter slowly and cleared his throat. Logan, we need to speak privately. Rick slammed his hand on the table. No, you don't. If it concerns the family, we all deserve to hear it. Delaney looked at me. It's up to you. My voice was small. Read it. The air in the room shifted. Delaney opened the letter again and began reading. His voice was slower now, heavier. Every word dropped like a stone. And that was when everything began to unravel. The silence that followed Mr. Delaney's words felt like the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the room. I could hear the ceiling fan ticking above us, the wood of the old table creaking under someone's clenched fist, and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I didn't know what exactly Grandma had written in that second letter, but from the look on Delaney's face, and the way Rick was shifting like he'd been caught hiding something, I knew it wasn't going to be good. Delaney adjusted his glasses and started reading from the letter in his hand. If this letter is being read aloud, it means Rick reacted exactly as I expected him to. And if he's already said Logan is too young or not ready, then that's all the more reason why I made the right decision. Rick's jaw tensed. Lorraine reached out to squeeze his arm, but he shook her off. Rick, I know you think you're entitled to this land. You've made it clear over the years that you've had your eye on the ranch, not because you love it, but because you see dollar signs. You and Lorraine have schemed long enough. You've tried to convince me to sell to developers. You even had Tyler mock up those phony plans for a sustainable resort last summer. She paused and blinked rapidly, her lips pressed thin. Delaney continued. You told me Logan would waste the land, that he's weak, and that he wouldn't know what to do with all of this. But here's what you never understood. Logan doesn't need to change this place to make it worthwhile. He sees it. He sees the value in keeping it what it is. He sees me. To Logan, I know this won't be easy, sweetheart. You're going to have them on your back. They'll try to make you feel like you don't belong here. But you do. More than anyone. You are the last person I trust to keep this place safe. Delaney lowered the letter. Rick looked like he was about to explode. Tyler muttered something under his breath. Something like, this is such crap. But I was too stunned to even register it fully. Rick pushed back his chair so hard it screeched against the floor. This is insane. This is some kind of manipulation. She was sick, probably not even in her right mind when she wrote that. Delaney calmly slid a notarized medical certificate across the table. Mrs. Winters had a psychiatric evaluation and full mental competency test administered by a third-party specialist 2 months before this was signed. She was fully lucid, fully aware. These decisions were made with complete legal oversight. Rick stood. I'm going to contest this. Mark my words, this isn't over. I finally spoke, my voice shaking but clear. Why would you want to fight for something you never even cared about? You never loved this place. You never loved her. Rick's eyes snapped to me like I'd slapped him. Don't act like you knew her better than I did, kid. You were a sympathy case. A broken toy she felt sorry for. That's why she kept you around. Something in me cracked. I stood too. You only ever showed up when it was convenient for you. When there was a check to cash or a favor to ask. She saw through you years ago, Rick. Everyone did. You were just too arrogant to notice. The lawyer cleared his throat, trying to keep the tension from erupting. The deed transfer will be processed within the week. You are all, of course, free to contest, but I advise you to consider the strength of the documents. No one said anything. Eventually, Rick and his family stormed out. Lorraine muttered something about lawyers. Brandon made a point of knocking over a decorative bowl on the way out, like that was supposed to hurt me. I stayed behind while Delaney packed up. He placed a hand on my shoulder before leaving. She believed in you, Logan. Don't let them make you forget that. The next few days were tense. At first, I tried to keep to myself. I moved into the ranch house, just like Grandma would have wanted. It was strange, waking up in the master bedroom, surrounded by the scent of lavender and cedar. I could still feel her presence in every room. I made coffee in her old percolator. I kept the same wooden wind chime on the front porch. For a few quiet moments, it felt like I was doing the right thing. But Rick wasn't done. On the third day, a white SUV pulled into the driveway. I was mucking out the barn when I saw it through the slats. Lorraine stepped out, heels sinking into the dirt, sunglasses perched on her head like she was walking onto a movie set. I met her at the gate. She didn't bother with small talk. Logan, let's be honest. This is a bit much for you, don't you think? I crossed my arms. What do you want? We're willing to make you a generous offer. Rick spoke to some real estate people. They're ready to move fast. You could walk away from all this with 7 figures in your pocket. No hassle. No stress. You're young. You don't need to be tied down to some old property in the middle of nowhere. I laughed. Is that what you told Grandma when you tried to get her to sell? Her smile tightened. We were trying to help her retire comfortably. She was retired. She was happy here. Come on, Logan. Be smart. You're not cut out for this. You're a college kid with no experience. What are you going to do? Raise cattle? Fix fences? Plant crops? I stared at her. I'll learn. She sighed. This is your chance to move on. Start fresh. If you hold on to this place, it's only going to cause problems. You mean, it's going to cause you problems? Her jaw clenched. She turned on her heel and walked back to the SUV. As it drove away, I saw Tyler in the passenger seat, flipping me off through the tinted window. That night, someone slashed my truck tires. I didn't have security cameras yet, but I didn't need them to guess who was responsible. I filed a report, and the local sheriff, an old friend of Grandma's, came by. He didn't say much, but I could tell he knew who'd done it too. Keep your head up, he said. This kind of stuff tends to escalate before it settles. He was right. The next week, I started getting calls. Local businesses Grandma used to deal with, feed store, tractor supplier, even the vet, suddenly started refusing to work with me. Politely, but firmly. One of them even said, sorry, but I've been told to avoid involvement until things settle legally. Turns out Rick had called nearly every vendor and told them the will was being contested and that I was under investigation for manipulation. It was all lies, but in a small town, rumors move faster than facts. I was suddenly the center of whispers. At the diner, people stared. Some old-timers wouldn't meet my eyes. Others gave me pitying looks. I started to feel isolated, boxed in. Exactly what Rick wanted. Then came the real betrayal. One afternoon, I came back from the hardware store to find the front door wide open. I ran inside. Nothing was missing, but the place had been searched. Drawers open. Cabinets rifled through. My laptop gone. So were the legal documents Delaney had given me. The only thing they left untouched was the photo of me and Grandma on the mantel. I knew who'd done it. I didn't have proof, but I knew. I called Delaney immediately. He told me to stay calm and that he'd send replacements for the documents. But the violation, the way they'd invaded the house, it shook me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a flashlight and a baseball bat. I kept hearing things, twigs snapping, the wind pushing through the trees, but nothing ever came. Still, the feeling stayed, like I was being watched. 2 days later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You can't win. Sell the ranch, or we'll take it from you. No signature. No threats of violence. Just cold certainty. That was my breaking point. Until then, I'd been trying to play fair. I figured if I just kept my head down, followed the legal path, I could honor Grandma's wishes and keep the ranch going. But now, Now I knew this wasn't just about property. They wanted to erase me, make me doubt myself, take the only place I'd ever truly belonged. I wasn't going to let them. I called Delaney again. What happens if they keep pushing? If they don't stop? He paused. Then we stopped being polite. That was the first time he mentioned the other documents. The ones Grandma had kept separate, just in case things got messy. A backup plan. I asked him to tell me more. He said it would be better if he showed me in person. I told him to come immediately. What he revealed next changed everything. Delaney arrived the next morning, pulling up in a dusty gray sedan. He looked more tired than the last time I'd seen him, like he hadn't slept well either, but his eyes sharpened the moment he stepped inside. He brought with him a thick black folder, sealed with a single red elastic band. We sat at Grandma's kitchen table, the same one where she used to make apple pies in the fall, and he set the folder between us like it was made of glass. What I'm about to show you, he said, was Evelyn's safety net. She knew Rick. She knew he wouldn't go quietly. So she left me this. She called it Plan B. He undid the band and opened the folder. Inside were dozens of documents. Scans of old letters, legal contracts, a deed I'd never seen before, and most shocking of all, an audio recording on a small USB stick. Your grandmother started recording conversations at the house after she got suspicious, Delaney explained. She kept them mostly between herself and Rick. Turns out, she caught more than she expected. He handed me the USB and let me plug it into my laptop. The audio file was labeled simply, R. Winters, August. I clicked play. What came next made my blood go cold. Rick's voice crackled through the speakers, low and casual. It's simple. You convince her to sell. We move her into that retirement condo in town. She's got no reason to hold on to this dump anymore. We tell her Logan's moving out of state, maybe got a job in Seattle or something. The old lady's sentimental. Use it. Lorraine's voice chimed in faintly. And if she says no? Rick chuckled. Then we make it hard for her to stay. Cut off the service calls. Stop sending help with repairs. We'll wear her down. Trust me, by winter she'll be begging for an apartment with heat. The rest of the conversation was filled with quiet scheming. Talk of calling developers. Talk of using Tyler as a plant to make her think the younger generation wanted the land gone. I could barely breathe as I listened. Delaney clicked stop. I've kept this in escrow, legally sealed, until such a time that it became necessary. It's admissible in court. It proves manipulation and intent to defraud. I leaned back, staring at the USB. So what do? We wait, he said. You rebuild. You get stronger. We let them think they've pushed you into a corner. And when the moment's right, you hit back. That moment wasn't coming anytime soon, but that was okay. Because something inside me had changed. I was done reacting. It was time to rebuild. But let me be honest, rebuilding wasn't romantic. For the first few weeks, I felt like I was dragging myself through wet cement. Every morning I'd wake up to a new obstacle. One morning the barn roof had partially collapsed under leftover storm damage. Another day I found that someone had clogged the irrigation system deliberately with rags and plastic bags. I had no help, no allies, and nearly no income. I wasn't a farmer. I was a 22-year-old with calluses forming too slow and problems piling up too fast. But I refused to quit. I started with small things. Fixing the fence line by hand. Watching YouTube videos at night about how to maintain the tractor engine. I'd sit in Grandma's study, flipping through her old notebooks, crop rotation plans, planting schedules, livestock health notes. She had documented everything in neatly labeled binders. Even her handwritten margins had advice. Be patient with the goats. They learn slower than the cows. I found myself talking to her out loud. You really believed I could do this, huh? And in that quiet, something settled. I realized she'd trained me, in her own way, for years. Teaching me how to check the soil with a simple touch, how to tell when a storm was coming by the air pressure, how to calm a spooked horse. It hadn't felt like lessons at the time. It had just felt like being loved. So I pushed on. By the second month, I'd hired a local handyman named Ernie, an old friend of Grandma's who'd retired but offered to help for a modest fee and free lunch. She always said you were the only one with a good heart, he told me one morning as we repaired a corral gate. Everyone else just wanted to pave paradise. Ernie introduced me to other locals who'd known Grandma, people Rick hadn't poisoned against me. I met Ruth, who ran the bakery and had done the books for the ranch years ago. She helped me organize my accounts. I met Luis, who had a landscaping business and offered to help trim the overgrown orchard in exchange for firewood. Bit by bit, the ranch started to breathe again. The air smelled sweeter. The grass looked greener. And my hands, once soft from years of keyboard typing, grew rough and capable. I started keeping a notebook, just like Grandma's, logging daily events. When the goats were milked, when the hens started laying again, which days I felt like giving up, and which days I didn't. I wasn't just running the ranch. I was becoming it. Of course, the threats didn't stop. Rick filed to contest the will, citing undue influence. I got a notice from the county about supposed zoning violations, clearly fabricated. Then, during a cold snap, someone turned off the power to the chicken coop, killing half of them overnight. It broke me. I sat in the hay, sobbing like a child, holding one of the frozen hens in my lap, thinking maybe Rick was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. But that's when I remembered what Delaney said. Let them think they've won. Then hit back. So I got up. I buried the hens. I replaced the lock on the breaker box. And I started calling in favors. By now, I had a small network of people who believed in me. Not because I paid them, but because they'd loved my grandmother. I told them what Rick was doing. I shared the recording. Quietly. Discreetly. I let the truth seep back into the community one person at a time. And it worked. Vendors started returning my calls. The feed store offered me a line of credit. The vet waived a visit fee and told me, "Your grandma once saved my clinic from foreclosure." This is nothing. I was no longer the outsider. I was becoming the heir in their eyes, not just legally, but spiritually. And Rick? Rick had no idea. Then came the county fair. Grandma had always entered the ranch's honey and apples in the local fair every fall. It was one of her traditions. I almost didn't go, but Ernie convinced me. She wouldn't forgive you if you skipped it. So I did. I brought 2 jars of wildflower honey and a crate of our best apples. Just a small display. Modest. But when the judges came around and saw the Winters Ranch name, they lingered, asked questions, smiled. 2 days later, I won a blue ribbon for the honey. I nearly cried. It wasn't the prize. It wasn't even about proving something to Rick. It was knowing that I hadn't let Grandma down. That her name still meant something in this town. That I could carry it. And maybe the best part? People talked. I saw whispers spread across town. Logan's turned that place around. He's working harder than anyone expected. Maybe Rick didn't deserve it after all. Rick must have heard those whispers too. Because just a week later, I got a formal invitation. A family meeting, hosted at Rick's place. His note was short. Let's talk before things go too far. At first, I thought it might be a trap. But something told me it might be his breaking point. Or his next move. Either way, I was ready. I put on my boots, packed a folder of documents, and walked into the lion's den. What happened next? Let's just say the tables were about to turn, for good. Rick's house sat atop a long gravel drive that crunched under the weight of my tires like dry bones. I hadn't been there since I was 17, back when they'd let me stay in the basement guest room for exactly 2 months after college orientation got delayed. Lorraine had made it clear, even back then, that I was an unwelcome burden. They'd taken me in only because Grandma had asked, and they reminded me of that fact every chance they got. But this time was different. This time I wasn't the scared, quiet kid with a duffel bag and nowhere to go. I parked near the garage and turned off the engine. For a few seconds I just sat there, staring at the 2-story suburban home that looked more like a showroom than a place people actually lived. The lawn was surgically trimmed. A wreath hung on the front door that probably hadn't been touched since Lorraine ordered it online. Everything about it screamed manufactured comfort. I stepped out of the truck with my worn folder in hand. Inside it were copies of the audio recording, notarized statements from 3 of Grandma's old friends, documentation of the will, and the survey results showing Rick's sustainable resort was already pitched to out-of-state investors last year, even though Grandma had rejected the idea outright. Evidence stacked and ready. The door opened before I reached it. Rick stood in the entryway, arms crossed. He wore a tight polo and khakis, but his face was redder than I remembered, his eyes tired and slightly sunken. "You showed," he said. I kept my tone flat. "You asked." He stepped aside without another word, and I walked in. Lorraine was waiting in the kitchen, sipping what I assumed was iced tea from a glass that clinked too loudly as she set it down. Tyler and Brandon sat at the island counter, both with their arms folded like they were trying to win some kind of intimidation contest. Brandon smirked. Tyler didn't look at me at all. I didn't sit. I wasn't planning to stay long. Rick gestured toward the dining room. Let's talk in private. I followed him, glancing around at the house as I walked. It hadn't changed, still sterile, still cold. There was a massive canvas print of the family from 5 years ago on the wall. I wasn't in it. Rick shut the door behind us and leaned against the table. We got off on the wrong foot. I didn't respond. He sighed. Look, I know you think I've been hard on you. Maybe I have. But that ranch, it's not just sentimental. It's legacy. It's something the family built over generations. Then why'd you try to sell it? I asked quietly. That stopped him for a second. He shifted. Because times change. Land's more valuable now than it's ever been. You think Grandma would have wanted you to struggle with goats and weeds when someone was offering her 8 figures? She didn't take that offer. She gave it to me. His mouth twitched. She made a mistake. No, I said, lifting the folder and setting it on the table. You made a mistake. You thought she'd roll over. You thought I would. He opened the folder and barely got past the second page before slamming it shut. Where'd you get this? She recorded you. And she gave Delaney instructions to keep everything under wraps until someone pushed too far. I leaned in. You've pushed too far. Rick stared at me, his expression flickering between frustration and something else. Panic? Maybe. But he was trying to suppress it. You can't prove I acted maliciously. Actually, I said, I can. And even if I couldn't, public opinion's already shifting. People know you lied about the will being under contest. The sheriff knows about the break-in. And I've got written statements from people who heard you threaten Grandma last year about the developer deal. He swallowed. You're losing control, I added. And I haven't even begun to fight back. For a moment, we stood in silence. Then Rick's voice lowered, almost pleading. What do you want? It wasn't a question I expected so soon. But I wasn't about to give him everything. Not yet. I want you to stop interfering, I said. Stop calling vendors. Stop spreading lies. Stop sabotaging the property. And if I don't, I smiled, thin and cold. Then I stopped playing nice. He didn't speak again as I left the room. Lorraine tried to say something as I walked through the kitchen, but I didn't stop to hear it. I just left. But on the way home, something occurred to me. Rick wouldn't give up that easily. This wasn't just about greed anymore. It was about ego. About pride. About the fact that he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he thought was beneath him. I could walk into his house and drop evidence in his lap, and he still wouldn't accept that he'd lost. So I needed to make him feel the loss. And that meant more than legal threats. It meant exposure. That night, I called Delaney and laid out a plan. Step 1, go public. I wrote an open letter to the town's local paper, framed as a tribute to Grandma. I talked about her love for the land, how she taught me to respect the earth, how she trusted me with the legacy she built. I didn't mention Rick by name, but I didn't need to. I let the facts speak for themselves. Quotes from her will, photos of the ranch in its restored state, and a note about how some members of the family had other intentions for the land. The paper ran it on the front page that Sunday. By Monday, I had 3 offers to collaborate with nearby farms on supply runs. By Wednesday, Rick's construction company had 2 contracts canceled. Step 2, rebuild alliances. I reached out to every person Rick had alienated. Grandma's old church group, the library where she used to volunteer, even the local high school principal, who had vague memories of me from years ago, but warm ones of Grandma reading to the elementary kids every Thursday. I didn't ask for favors. I just shared what had happened. And the town responded. The library hosted a Winter's Ranch Day in Grandma's honor. The feed store printed flyers with my honey label, Logan's Gold, and put them by the register. People started stopping by the ranch just to say hi. Step 3, regain control of the narrative. I launched a small website, wintersranch.org, nothing fancy. Just pictures, stories, a section about Grandma's legacy, and our plans for a sustainable, community-friendly future. I posted updates about the orchard, photos of the goats, even a little blog about what it's like to manage a property at 22 with no clue what you're doing. People loved it. And soon, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Then came the final piece. I found out through a mutual contact that Rick had one final card he was planning to play. A petition to have the will frozen pending a fraud investigation. No legal merit, just enough noise to tie things up in court and bleed me dry with legal fees. So I beat him to it. I filed for an injunction, backed by Delaney's evidence, a formal civil suit outlining manipulation, fraud, and malicious interference with a lawful estate. We included the recording, the false zoning complaints, the forged developer documents, and testimonies from locals. It wasn't just defense anymore. It was offense. And Rick had no idea it was coming. The court date was set, and the town buzzed with rumors. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. But no one, not even Rick, knew about the letter. The third envelope. The one Delaney hadn't opened yet. The one Grandma had marked. Only read if they try to destroy what matters most. And trust me, they were about to. The morning of the hearing, the sky was overcast, gray, heavy, but dry. It felt symbolic, like everything had been building toward this single day, and even the weather knew to keep its mouth shut. I wore a simple black button-down shirt, jeans, and boots polished cleaner than they'd ever been. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I wanted to feel like me. Not a lawyer, not a victim, not a kid, but Logan Winters, grandson of Evelyn Winters, and rightful heir to everything she'd spent her life building. Delaney met me on the courthouse steps, holding a leather-bound case in one hand and a takeaway coffee in the other. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." Inside, the courtroom wasn't dramatic. No grand jury, no gavel slams. Just a probate judge at the bench, a few rows of pew-style seats, and some familiar faces in the gallery. Ruth from the bakery was there. Ernie sat in the back, arms folded over his suspenders. Even the sheriff showed up, nodding when our eyes met. It reminded me that I wasn't walking into this alone. Rick arrived late. Of course he did. He entered with his usual bluster, flanked by a lawyer in a shiny navy suit, who looked like he practiced most of his arguments in a mirror. Lorraine trailed behind them, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Tyler and Brandon didn't show. Delaney stood, greeted the court, and began laying out our case. The will, the notarized documentation, the verified psychiatric evaluation of Grandma from before the signing, and, most importantly, the audio recording. The judge, an older man with a face like worn oak, leaned in slightly when the audio played. Everyone did. Rick didn't blink, didn't even flinch, but Lorraine went pale. Her fingers gripped the edge of the bench like she wanted to snap it in two. Delaney didn't gloat. He was calm, professional, just the facts. And when Rick's lawyer took the floor, everything fell apart. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of undue influence. The decedent was manipulated by the plaintiff, a young and emotionally dependent relative." Delaney interrupted with a motion to admit the envelope. "The third one." The judge raised an eyebrow. "There's more." Delaney nodded. "This was left in trust, unopened, until the family's actions warranted it. It contains Evelyn Winters' final personal statement, legally notarized, dated 1 week before her passing." The bailiff took the envelope to the judge, who slit it open with a small knife. The courtroom fell completely silent. The judge read. His eyebrows rose, then lowered, then rose again. When he finished, he set the letter down and looked up. "I'm entering this into the record." He cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "If they are reading this, it means the people I feared would try to undo my final wishes have done just that. Rick, I'm talking to you. I know you. I know how your pride works. And I know that when you lose something you thought you had control over, you throw tantrums like a spoiled child." Several heads turned. Rick's jaw twitched. "I raised you better than this, but you chose greed. You chose entitlement. You never once asked me what I wanted for the ranch. You only ever talked about how you could benefit from it. Logan may be young, but he is kind, quiet, steady, everything this land needs. And he has something you've never had, humility. If you are still trying to take this place from him, then I have only one request to the court: deny it. With prejudice. And if they attempt any further manipulation, release the documents enclosed with this letter. They detail financial misconduct, including attempts to defraud me through false contractor bills filed under your name. I have signed statements, copies of the bills, and bank records to prove it. Logan, my sweet boy, if they try to burn this place down, let them know you've got the water." A quiet gasp passed through the courtroom. Delaney opened another document from his briefcase. These are the attachments referenced. Bank statements. Fraudulent invoices. They tie directly to Mr. Winters and Mr. Brandon Winters, who appears to have served as a digital intermediary. The judge held up a hand. "Stop. That's enough." He looked at Rick. "Mr. Winters, do you wish to proceed?" Rick opened his mouth, then closed it again. Lorraine leaned in and whispered something. Rick shook his head. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes: resignation. The fight had drained out of him. His lawyer stood. We withdraw our contest. The judge nodded slowly. So noted. This court rules the will of Evelyn Winters as legally binding and valid. Logan Winters is affirmed as sole heir of the Winters Ranch and all associated assets. Case dismissed. The gavel came down. And just like that, it was over. Or, at least, the legal part was. Outside the courtroom, Rick didn't say a word. Lorraine stalked off like she was late for a brunch. But just before Rick climbed into his car, he looked back at me. Not with hatred, with something like defeat. He knew he'd lost. And not just the ranch. He'd lost the illusion that he was the center of our family. That everything would bend to his will. That no matter how he treated people, they'd always fold. But not this time. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just watched him go. Back at the ranch, things were different. The orchard was blooming again. Pink and white petals flickering in the wind like confetti. The goats followed me around now like overgrown dogs. Even the chickens had been replaced, thanks to donations from a few kind-hearted townsfolk who'd read about the sabotage and wanted to help. We reopened the roadside stand. We sold honey, fresh eggs, and apples by the bag. People stopped calling it Evelyn's Ranch. They started calling it Logan's. But I didn't correct them, because deep down, it was still hers. I was just the steward now, the hands she left behind to keep the soil warm, the gates strong, and the light on in the windows. One afternoon, I sat on the front porch with Ernie. He sipped his lemonade and looked out over the fields. Your grandma would be proud, he said. I nodded. I think she'd be furious it took this much drama. But yeah, maybe. He chuckled. You gonna frame that letter? I smiled. Already did. It hangs in the living room now, next to our photo. Every morning, I pass it on the way to the kitchen. And every morning, I read that last line like a prayer. If they try to burn this place down, you've got the water. And now, I do. I always did.